as I know you are hanging on to lots of other things you got to get done before that school year like no other comes to its conclusion. I am grateful to see so many of you still being with us in this work. And I'm especially grateful for those of you who shared your thoughts in the survey around sort of social studies resources that are useful to you and ones that would be useful to you to have. And for those of you who are serving in dual roles on both the writing committee and the advisory committee, because I know what a lift that is, and we deeply appreciate having that continuity between both. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Darren, if you want to share your screen again so we can see the slides, we'll move through some of the introductory pieces and get into the meat of the meeting. So as promised, we're having 4 quarterly SISAC meetings this year, plus a couple of special editions. We had one special edition already when folks came together to offer feedback on the initial outline framework for the standards. We'll have another one in July, and we'll talk about that at the end of the meeting. Here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to do a quick icebreaker in the chat so that folks can just catch each other up a little bit on what you're looking forward to about this summer. We'll spend some time hearing about the OSSE Technical Writing Committee, and we can go a little longer on that. I imagine folks may have questions, so that time can bleed into our resource mapping conversation. And then we'll wrap up with some next steps. One is an opportunity, and one is a reminder about when we expect we'll have a draft of the standards and how we'll handle that with the SISAC. You can go to the next slide, Darren. Those are our objectives for the meeting. They're also on your agenda, pretty high level. We're going to hear updates on the writing committee, and we'll talk about ways we can start to build elements of a social studies community that you all have identified might be missing. And that could be by creating new things, or it could be by helping each other find resources that you know about that others have yet to access, because I think both of those things may be true in this group. Next slide. Reminder of who is on our committee. I want to note that because there are a few of these folks, quite a few of these folks who are not here tonight, some folks have reached out to let us know that the schedule just wasn't permitting them to attend. So we are still happy to have a full cohort of folks on the SISAC. And I am extra grateful for those of you who were able to make the meeting tonight. Next slide. Same norms as usual. I think tonight is probably really important that we build our energy and that we accept non-closure, because there will be things that come up tonight that we don't have answers to yet, especially around the future of the standards. And it is late in the school year, late in the day. So bring the energy to our conversations and we'll make that hour go by quickly. Next slide, please. Welcome back. I am very excited about the summer for a whole bunch of reasons. And I was in multiple meetings today in which this was the icebreaker. So it is my icebreaker for you. Please put in the chat for all of us to catch up on one thing you are looking forward to about this summer. And if you are looking forward to many things, feel free to tell us the plethora of things you are looking forward to. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing baseball and SBOE recess, international travel, time away from computers. Lots of love for Nats games there. Visits to friends and families, a big old vacation to the outdoors. So much time outdoors. Having family come visit you. Oh my gosh, Vermont is my favorite place in the summer too. I love it. Reading. A new son, yay! Yes, actually, for those of you who don't know this, Alex is not currently actually in this meeting as a staff member. He is here only as an observer because he has a beautiful new addition to the family, Oliver. So we're very excited that our state board family grew by one, and we're very excited for Alex and for his family. Love it. Yay, so much love for new additions to the family, and so much wonderful opportunities to see family. So I'm so excited. I put in there, I'm super excited about swimming at DPR pools. I am totally spoiled here in DC. I love outdoor pools. I love swimming. I love sitting by the pool. And I don't think I realized just how good we have it in DC, how many public pools we have, how accessible they are all over the city. We got splash pads, we've got pools. Friends of mine were visiting from New York this weekend and mentioned that in New York, the public pools are pretty restrictive in terms of like out on the pool deck, it's like you and your towel, no books, no lawn chairs, no nothing. So as we were sitting over at Rosedale Pool on our lounge chairs with our books and our snacks by our side, we were feeling pretty special that this resource exists in DC and that you can, bring out of town guests to them. So thanks for sharing what you're excited about this summer. I know our writing committee is also excited about the writing. So without further ado, we're going to move on to opportunities for updates from the writing committee. If you go one more slide, Darren, I'll just tee up a little bit. I reached out and asked Beth Ratway, who is our AAR liaison, facilitating the work of the writing committee, if she had some updates for us. And so I got sort of a double dose. I got updates from Beth and an offer that folks from the writing committee would be willing to share. So I'm going to first turn this over to Sarah, who's going to lead us through some things. But these are some of the high points we're going to hit. We're going to hear a little bit about writing teams and the leads, how the standards are being broken down into grade band sequencing. We'll hear a little bit about some of these key elements that our standards writers are paying attention to as they do their work, and then a little bit about what their summer work entails. Darren, if you want to stop sharing, I will go ahead and pull up the outline that Sarah shared with us from Beth. Let me try this again and share the screen. And Beth, that way you can just narrate and you can let me know if I should scroll at any point here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a million, Jessica. And since I know I'm not the only one who's serving on the technical writing committee, I'd like to invite everyone else who serves in that capacity to chime in as well, because there will be holes in my retelling or my recap. So when Beth last met with us, she kind of updated us on some of the structural components that the technical writing committee was kind of grappling with as we anticipated what we wanted to include and how we wanted to kind of crystallize our vision in a way that really encapsulates the guiding principles that we all developed. So some of those structural elements were things like those strands, cross-cutting concepts, core ideas, and skills. So since then, we've now started to hammer out structures, and we're really starting to grapple with that within the different grade bands. So we're looking at kind of elementary, K through 5, middle school, and then high school. So far, we're really kind of still meeting very vertically, although you would argue that K through 5 is, we're meeting more horizontally than we are vertically, although K through 5 is kind of vertical. So pushing into that more vertical conversation is going to be part of the work of this summer. That's going to be facilitated by the newly identified leads for the different grade bands. So that's exciting. So what you're seeing right here is some of the form that we're hammering out in the K through 5 grades. So you see that we have some themes here and some cross-cutting concepts across the grades. One way that we're thinking of building this out is kind of taking the expanding horizons model and building that out instead of vertically, building that out horizontally, so that at each grade level, you're looking at what representation looks like in the classroom, in your community, in the country, and then globally. And so you're constantly doing that in those iterations across each grade level. So you see the seed of our structure taking shape here with K through 5. Scrolling down, you'll see kind of the 6 through 8 draft with descriptions of what that looks like. And again, a reminder that grades 9 through 12 are bound to certain requirements that, Jessica, if you scroll down, you'll see that we are required to have 2 world histories. Right, so we have world history 1 and 2. We're required to have US history, US government, DC history. all that's required. So within that, anyway, so those are that's the structure that we're bound to in high school level. So again, so the current work kind of goes back to what you saw on the elementary piece, how we're really kind of identifying the topics under certain grade level themes, right? What's exciting is that the leads have been identified. So in K through 5, we have Natalie Staper, who's coming from independent schools, and Alexis Field, who's coming from charter schools. We've got Melanie Holmes, a DCPS teacher, Anthony Hiller from the social studies team downtown, Lindsay McCrae, and Melanie also is also on our SISAC, which is awesome. Lindsay McCrae, who's part of the social studies team at DCPS, and none other than Michael Stevens, who's right here, and so who's also serving as a team lead. If you could scroll down, Jessica, to kind of the key elements. So key elements that we're kind of striving to include are these core ideas, these anchor standards for each strand, which include DC social studies, or DC studies rather, guiding and essential questions, key themes or units, using these as organizing principles, then blending our content and skills across K through 12 and then 9 through 12. So I think I've kind of run out of steam here. Oh, and then so this is actually in the Google Drive, so you can look at this. You can tap into the anchor standards yourselves to take a look at them, the kinds of content and skills that we're trying to blend together into the standards. You'll see a really kind of, you'll see a template, a sample template that, that we have referenced in our work. Also, as we go forward, we're going to start actually writing the standards. So in upcoming meetings, we'll dive into those next steps, which is how to write a standard and reviewing the criteria for academic standards, finalizing our topics, finalizing our anchor standards and current standards. So lots of great kind of high level work that we've done so far. And now we're really looking forward to getting into the nitty gritty of it. Something that's really comforting about the work that I participated in and that I've observed certainly in the elementary band is the real passion and commitment. So, and I think it's very similar to the kind of passion and commitment that the SISAC has demonstrated in our commitment toward developing the guiding principles that we produced. So conversations around vertical alignment that came forward at our last SISAC meeting, those are the conversations that we're having in the technical writing committee. There was a point about how are we teaching through Black history. These are the kinds of conversations we're having in the technical writing committee. So these are, it's a group of very like-minded people to the people who are here in the SISAC, which is really comforting. So you'll see that once school closes, we're taking that deep dive into the summer work. So we're looking at 3 hours on a weekly basis at least, right? And then getting together for large group work, which would hopefully avail for some of that vertical collaboration. Small teams will be meeting synchronously and asynchronously and checking in weekly with team leads. So it's time for the rubber to hit the road. So anything else? And also, if you have any questions or feedback, any comments, I believe Darren dropped a Google Doc in the Drive that you could just type into, and that way Beth can see them, and then we as a group could see them, and that kind of eliminates my faulty memory as the middleman. But if anyone else would like to chime in around this and provide their insights, they'd be very welcome.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was really great. Yeah, I invited especially anyone else who's on the technical writing committee. It would be great to hear additional thoughts, deep dives maybe into the middle school work or the high school work. And then Darren just dropped a link into the chat, so feel free to click on that. I'm gonna stop sharing so we can see each other's faces and I can see if folks have hands up and want to chime in.
I'll just add on, thank you again so much, Sarah, for reviewing all of that. The only thing I'll add on is, and an opportunity for feedback as well, is at the high school level, a lot of the conversation we've had, and we're kind of at a sticking point, is concerning sequencing. As Sarah explained, and I'm sure all high school people know, we're pretty locked in terms of what must be addressed as far as the course requirements, the graduation requirements go. But there's been a lot of discussion concerning sequencing. By that, I mean, do we formally say which course gets taught in what grade? And then if we do, does the order look as it is similar now, or do we move possibly US history to 9th grade? So there would be more of a natural sequence from 7th to 8th to 9th grade in terms of civics, US history content flowing there. Just to quickly summarize some of the arguments. One of the arguments for moving it, I kind of already alluded to, would be just a natural sequence of progression for students to stick to US content, so there wouldn't be as much of a drop off as some people feel occurs when kids move to high school and all of a sudden go to a world history curriculum. There's also the argument to be made, though, that some people want there to not be a formal sequence of grades written into the standards for LEAs, to have an opportunity to design their own and select their own. Pushback against that is, given the movement of kids throughout LEAs in the city, I'm sure something all of us have experienced, where sometimes kids move from DCPS to a charter, maybe even then back to DCPS. It would just be really helpful if all LEAs in the city followed the same sequence. So that's kind of one of the big rocks that we're working through. So I definitely invite people for any thoughts, comments, or feedback formally on that would be awesome.
Melanie was in, and I'm not sure if she's back again. She was in, then we lost her, then looks like she's back, but yes? Hooray.
Sorry.
So Melanie, we can see you now, but I don't know if it's just my audio or if we can not hear you clearly.
I'm here.
Hi.
Can you hear? You can't hear me at all?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay. While we wait to see if we can get Melanie's connection better, are there questions or reactions from anyone in the room? Processing, just thinking about it.
Is there a reason why LEAs would want to switch around the order of the high school courses? Or is that just potentially they would?
I'm sorry, I don't know if that was directed to high school. I couldn't hear that very well, Daniel. I apologize. I heard, is there a reason why LEAs would want to switch?
The order of the high school courses?
Yeah, so the reasons that have come up were, again, that idea of just since 8th grade is US history, it would be more helpful, they feel like, for kids to be able to just naturally progress from 8th grade US to 9th grade high school US history, as opposed to jumping into the world history courses. That's the most consistent rationale that has come up in the meetings that some people have offered. For what it's worth, others in our meetings have countered that, given how relatively young America is in the grand scope of the world, it's really helpful and important for kids to have a global context of the world and events before jumping into the US. And even, the idea that it's almost like kind of jingoistic, these people who have raised those concerns feel, to not address US world history as it's currently done. So those are rationales for both sides.
I'm going to come next to Melanie while we've got her sound, and then I'll come to Sally with her question.
Hi, I'm sorry. I've been in and out of karate class in the car, so I'm not sure what was the question.
If you had anything else you thought might be helpful to add around middle school, since I'm super excited about the themes for middle school. That has me really
okay. Yeah, so thank you. So the sixth grade, and I'm not sure what's already said. So if I sound redundant, I apologize. But so sixth grade and eighth grade we kind of pretty much talked about keeping those the same. Sixth grade, there was some reluctance to change that thematically because of a fear of like losing explicit instruction around geography. And eighth grade, as students are matriculating from middle school to high school, the idea was to keep that U.S. history centered so that chronologically, if students are going from middle school to high school, they'll enter high school with some U.S. history background. We did not get to communicate with the with the high school teachers the way we wanted to. But I hope that when we meet next, we'll be able to have conversations, the middle school team will be able to have conversations with the high school teachers, because I think there was some conversation earlier in this meeting about the sequencing. We're trying to decide, what is the best sequence of how content should be delivered from K through 12. I think that's going to be like an ongoing conversation that we're probably going to circle back to and do a good examination of at the end of our work on the writing committee. And then seventh grade, people just aren't fans of ancient civilizations, it being an isolated course. My suggestion was that we use ancient civilizations as context and build that into sixth grade, because as we move around to different continents in sixth grade world geography, it would make sense to talk about how those civilizations began. But right now, the only consensus for seventh grade is to change the theme, but talking about it, like finalizing it's still kind of up in the air. We don't want to lose ancient civilizations, but we think that it should be presented differently in ways that's more relatable.
Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. And thanks for sticking with us with technical challenges.
No worries.
That's happening all over today. Sally, coming to you next, and then to Scott afterwards.
Oh, hi, thank you. And those last comments were helpful to me. I just am curious, especially with the elementary grades, how closely, I guess, sort of the content and the standards at each grade level. We had our own discussion about, do we want a total rewrite, or are you amending, fixing what is there? And I'm just kind of curious if the people involved can give a sense of how deeply you're going to change things, or how much you're going to stick with the themes that are there. I'm kind of curious about elementary school. I don't know. Are you sticking with the themes and the content at each grade level, or are you changing that?
So we're changing that up in that we've identified kind of these themes and these cross-cutting kind of the ideas that kind of span them, right? Span the all of the social studies, right? And then we're going to be kind of working it in maybe at different grade levels. So we've got these ideas like justice, and that's fifth grade. And so we're going to be looking at justice, like what does justice look like just in our classroom, in our school? What does it look like in DC? What does it look like worldwide? And so what we're now fleshing out now are kind of those topics. And what we want to do is kind of create space for teachers to have a little bit of autonomy around that. Like, how am I going to teach justice in DC, right? How am I going to teach justice in the United States? And yet we also want to give some kind of, instructional prompts as well. So we're trying to hit all of that great stuff, but it might not kind of be in the same way that it's been presented through the elementary grades so far. Does that make sense? So you might have third grade grappling with, and actually you're going to have the younger grades grappling with an idea on more of a global level than they have previously. Does that answer your question, Sally?
It kind of does. I'm just curious, again, like I can't even remember what the topics were the old topics were per grade level, but maybe one was folklore or heroes. So are these new themes substituting for those?
Yeah.
Or, okay, that's what I understand. So it's a
not
really
necessarily-
major overhaul, it sounds like to me, based on what I'm hearing as
Well, it's more
opposed.
like I would say it's more of a reorganization,
Okay,
right? Under different themes. So, and Sally, I know the globalization piece is close to your heart. And so we're really trying to get that at every grade level in a way that's developmentally appropriate.
good. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Scott, coming to you next. Not on mute this time.
No, thanks. Just question about the course sequence from middle school to high school, but also I think this involves elementary as well. I know I've talked with Lindsay and Anthony, especially on my team, in those two groups, but I think what I've heard, just kind of building on what Mike shared, the rationale for the possible change in course sequence. If ancient world history is not happening in 7th grade as it stands as a separate standalone course, I think there's a good opportunity there to have more of a strong civics focus, which is I think what I saw in the document Sarah was sharing, which could really nicely build towards 8th grade US history. And then if you continue up into 9th grade with that second half of US history, that might address some of the concerns that I know we have heard from our teachers oftentimes, that the jump between the first half of early American history in 8th grade and then the second half being in 11th grade, a lot of teachers have felt like, you know, it's such a long space between those that they really have to do a lot. They have spent a lot of time going back to the 8th grade contents. So there could be a real advantage there if you can sequence those courses right in a row. I think one possible way to make sure that the ancient world history content does not get lost is to think about perhaps that could come up into the world history 1 and 2 sequence in the high school grades, which maybe could go from 10th and 11th grade. So I think, again, a lot of our 9th grade world history 1 teachers tend to want to start a little further back and with some of those ancient civilization foundations. And so there might be some advantages there. But to Sarah's point about globalizing elementary, I think there's also an opportunity to bring some of that world history content down into the elementary grades, because currently right now, you really only see it in 1st grade with the Aztecs, Incas, Mayas, and there's really no other world history to speak of in any of the K-5 grade levels. So I think if you can really be attentive to, if the writing teams can really coordinate the K-5, the 6-8, and the 9-12, I think there's an opportunity to keep that through line of global and world history focus across the grade bands, but also to really tighten up that sequence of US history in a way that I think would be really beneficial for our 9th graders, which is one of the really key grades to make sure that students are being successful as they come into high school there. So I just wanted to add that extra context that I've heard from my team on the course sequencing question.
If I can also, your feedback, if I could just say one more thing. So again, so Darren dropped a link in the chat for your questions and comments. You guys are bringing up such really great points that I really want them to directly translate to our next technical writing committee meeting. Beth would love to see them. So please, please, please dump your excellent thoughts in there, please. Did I say please? How many times did I say it? Please?
Melanie, go ahead. I know you were trying to get in.
The buttons. I just was wondering, based off of what Scott said, I think Scott, you were saying that in elementary school, the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayans are the main ancient civilizations talked about. So I'm wondering if, in addition to, or possibly in place of just adding it to the high school, if we could also add some to elementary. So just building on to that idea.
That's looking like you're getting a lot of support from Scott on that one. So I want to thank Sarah and Melanie and Michael for providing us this great overview. I want to remind everyone that in the chat, you've got 2 links, one for me, which is view only, that shows the document that Sarah shared so that you can see the pieces of information I know a lot of you were sort of digging in more on in your comments. And then there's a editable document that Darren shared where you can throw your thoughts in, because I think that it would be really helpful, to Sarah's point, for the writing team to have your thoughts and feedback on where things are so far. this was something that I really valued that OSSE was willing to keep doing with us, which is this sort of iterative back and forth to make sure that good questions, good ideas are coming up now from this committee to the writing committee. And hopefully we'll sort of give them more food for thought. Obviously, you all are thinking through so much right now in the sequencing and the themes, but hopefully we'll also give you insights into the kinds of questions that folks may have as the standards keep developing. So if you've got those comments, drop them in there. I would love to move us on just so we can talk a little bit about the social studies community and manage our time. But definitely for those of you still thinking and processing and making notes, we'll leave another minute or two at the end if anyone's got anything else that they want to give voice to tonight. Sound okay? Cool. Thank you all for being thoughtful, for being willing to share, and for managing all the tech difficulties. I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to the full in-person world yet, but I'm also really going to be glad when my life isn't dominated by Zoom technology issues every day. Darren, can we go back to screen sharing the presentation? Awesome. And we'll go to the next slide. So about 10 people had filled out the resource mapping survey when I created this. So if you haven't filled it out, please do. The link is in your email and we'll just update this. What I thought was really interesting is that on this slide of the deck, these are all the kinds of organizations, both local, in DC, regional, and national, that folks identify that they are part of, where more than one member of the SISAC who responded was part of it. So there are some common groups that seem to be favorites of our SISAC members. And it's not really surprising, given the guiding principles we wrote, given the things it's clear that we all care about in relation to the social studies. We've got organizations focused on the social studies, organizations focused on issues of justice, tolerance, equity. We've got organizations focused on civics and student action and activism. And then we've got some institutions, right? Smithsonian makes sense. It's our hometown museum. So these are the sort of the common ones folks are part of. If you go to the next slide, the sort of flip side of that is there's a whole bunch of groups that only one person wrote down, but folks are reaching out to a variety of different kinds of resources, both locally, regionally, and nationally. So I'll give you a minute to just take a look at some of these because there were some that were new to me. Like I'm super curious on the professional learning community on equity in civic education. Like I want to know more about that. I'd not heard about that before. Same thing is true for me of the Teach the Black Freedom Struggle virtual classes. Like super curious about that. Hadn't heard about it, would love to know more. And then there are others that are more familiar to me that I wonder, do other members in the SISAC not know about? Like I did street law when I was teaching middle school and it was wonderful and a really great program. Modern Classrooms Project, doing really interesting work with thinking about student mastery in classrooms and how teachers are taking ownership of giving students more control over navigating their learning. So this struck me as really interesting because I think there are resources that you all know of that I'd love to find ways for you to share with one another. Darren, if you come on to the next slide, I wanted to sort of pose this next piece, which is when I put out there, like, what do you wish existed? What are you looking for? These are some of the things that came up. So folks are looking for groups that they're not sure if exist. So if you look at the first three bullets, question is like, do they exist? Do they need to be formed? Do they exist and people don't know about them? Could we connect one another to those? And then the last two strike me as groups that are needing to be initiated, right? If we wanted to create a DC Council for the Social Studies, we got to band together and do that. If we want some sort of a virtual platform where people could share ideas that is not directly connected to something moderated by LEA leadership, we could do that. That's something the SISAC could put out there as a sort of cross-sector, cross-school opportunity. Thank you for that link, Ms. Rucker. But I wanted to ask two questions coming out of both that great list of orgs that only one person mentioned and these questions. Next slide, Darren. First is, could the CISAC help each other identify or launch one or more of these ideas at the top? Like, does anyone know of groups that do this, that support teaching multiple perspectives all year long, not just sort of periodic? Drop some things in the chat or raise your hand. This looks interesting, Jen.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about not all year long? Because the Zen Ed and Teaching for Change, well, Rethinking Schools magazine and Teaching for Change have come together to create this Zen Education project. But then there's a social studies working group that meets monthly.
So I don't know. I do not remember offhand who provided this. If you are in this conversation today, if you answered this and you are here and want to elaborate further on this.
Could have been a few of us. That's why I wondered.
Yeah.
But that's what I would offer. Like we meet monthly. There's also this every Monday kind of learning space and community. Trying to think of other context, but yeah. And what did you mean by the multiple perspectives?
So this was my question that I brought forward, and I guess what I was trying to get at is how do we help teachers? And I'm thinking of like people who like maybe new teachers or so. Again, as an elementary educator, I've taken a social studies methods class, but I'm not an historian. So how do we shore up the gaps that might exist for elementary educators in their understanding of US and world history? And what are and so when I say multiple perspectives, I mean perspectives that aren't just the European American perspective that is characterized, the history I've learned. And how can we support teachers in teaching that in a way that is sustained throughout the year? So that question or that exploration, those inquiries are maintained throughout the year, and they aren't just isolated read alouds. And we do have powerful books that are available and powerful read alouds, but when I first took on this work and I asked for this, people kept telling me about picture books and read alouds, but there has to be more than that. And that's what I was trying to get toward. I don't know if that makes anything clearer.
In listening, one thing I wonder about in hearing this, Sarah, and then I'm going to turn to Daniel, is it feels like it's in some ways sort of a methodological and a pedagogical question in addition to a resource question around the elementary grades, where folks are less likely to be steeped in content and more likely to have some methods courses that may be limited or maybe dominated by European perspective, which I'm sure is also dominating teacher prep programs, right? If we're seeing it dominate the history we all learned, it's probably dominating our preparatory programs as well. Turning to Daniel, and then I'm going to come back to Jessica, who dropped some good things in the chat as well.
So just for clarification, so are we trying to decide whether or not we want to, because this sounds like curriculum, to kind of endorse curricular materials and resources as like an appendix or a separate thing, or would these be possibly baked into the standard so that you have like standard X and these are resources that you could use to teach with it, but not necessarily like a set curriculum that you would pick up and go with? Just, I'm not quite clear and kind of.
Yeah, it's a good question, Daniel. And I think you are a step level lower in granularity than I am in my asking of the question, which is essentially my sense from our conversation in March and from the survey results is that the concept of a sort of social studies community in DC, folks knowing where to go for resources, folks feeling like they have what they need and want, is is not as fully formed as it might or could be, and that opportunities exist to use the standards revision process to help add to the existing resources and community that teachers feel like they have access to. Because I would say that folks who signed up for the SISAC and folks who signed up for the writing committee are probably deeply steeped in materials and resources in a way that maybe all your colleagues are not. I don't want to be exclusive. I'm sure there are other folks who applied or might have liked to apply at time allowed, but folks who chose, who voluntarily stood up for this are folks who are already sort of connected to the community. And it makes me wonder if what are you missing is probably a good indication of what lots of folks also feel like they're missing. So without yet getting to the level of could these be tied to standards, I'm trying to just surface up conversations we could and should have about how we do this district-wide across all sorts of social studies teachers.
Jessica, I think you really nailed that on the head. For me as a teacher, I'm constantly trying to find new curricular materials. And so I'm teaching a new way every time as I try to pull up more materials and make it more and more relevant. And yet, you're right, I geek out on it. And so what about those teachers who aren't able to? You know, how are we supporting them?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I want to make sure I have attention in my head as I'm thinking about some work I'm involved in. Like, we want to make sure that we're clear on at what level our work can happen, right? We're not writing curriculum. Curriculum is the purview of LEAs under our district law. On the other hand, it would be a darn shame if we had this brand new set of standards and no collective effort at having curriculum that reflected the new standards that could be a joint effort by teachers across LEAs. Like, there's a big space for me ideologically between mandated curriculum and opportunities to collectively create curriculum. And I like to live in that middle space. I'm going to come to Scott and then to Jessica.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this makes me think of something we've talked about previously, which is the idea of what kind of standards implementation professional developments might be able to be supported by OSSE, some combination of OSSE and the state board that could go across sectors. Because, even, to your point, Jessica, about, whether or not there's curricular, shared curricular ideas that could happen across different LEAs, I think even if we were focusing on building teachers' knowledge as it relates to the new standards directly, could then inform the creation of curriculum, even if we couldn't get down to the level of granularity of curriculum. So, and I think looking at the K-5 sequence that Sarah, sort of showed in that document there, I think there's going to be a lot of elementary teachers who are going to say, okay, change making power and disruption in 4th grade. That sounds great, but what does that actually mean? And, I think there's going to be great opportunities to build teachers' content knowledge as it relates to those specific topics. I think it's a great theme, but I think, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are wondering, what does that actually mean in my classroom? And, perhaps one of these other bullets down here could help with that as well. But I think this goes towards, I think the states that have had effective implementation of new standards, they've really dedicated professional development coming from the state level to help teachers make sense of the new standards, especially in the places where they've changed significantly from the prior standards.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. I'm turning to Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope my suggestions here are in line with the conversation. But what's coming to mind in my experience is working with Teaching for Change. And so they offer a combination of professional development. They curate resources for classroom teachers, actually pre-K through 12. There's spaces where people develop lessons and curriculum, and they have a national focus, but like a local priority impact. So for example, in early childhood education, there's folks that come together to look at specifically anti-bias education for early learners. Then the Zen Ed project tends to focus more on maybe not comprehensive curriculum, but learning activities that could be implemented that are pretty consistent to the direction that our new social studies standards will be heading, like civil rights teaching, There's curricular focus on teaching Central America, challenging Islamophobia, ways to preserve DC culture through teaching go-go. So again, maybe not complete like curriculum, but there are a series of lessons around topics that are directly connected to like the themes that our new social studies standards would be focused on. And so this might be a space that is already somewhat organized or potential collaborative partnership to help kind of build a new initiative to kind of be a lab for some of what we're talking about, if that's helpful, but I might be a little off.
Yeah, no, I like that, Jessica. I also think that, you know, you raised the point specific about teaching for change, but also the notion that like when resources exist that do this work already, perhaps we don't reinvent the wheel, but we're strategic in linking up to make sure that we, one, spread the word about it, and two, leverage the talent and time already put into the work. Lizzie, I want to come to you.
Yep. I'm super excited about all these resources. I'm not even a K-12 teacher, and these look awesome. So I can't wait to check them out. So thank you for that. I'm so excited about this conversation because this is so important. And I'm just wondering, what is the role of principals? So how can we include them so they can support teachers in these different activities, and how we can shift it so some teachers will see this less as an add-on, but it's something that's really going to be engaging and hopefully enjoyable. So just thinking about principals, I don't have any answers. I just want to throw it out.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing for us to sort of surface as well. So because I am apparently a really bad time manager today, and I got so excited about the depth of our conversation, it's 5:51. So Darren, I'm going to have you move us to the next slide so I can ask another question that we're probably not going to be able to get to answers to, but I think we've sort of surfaced, which is my question, and we'll make this a little rhetorical, but also the conversation doesn't stop tonight kind of question, which is, these survey responses say to me that there are folks interested in connecting with one another to learn about groups that might exist or to form ones if they don't. So I hope that that is something we can continue to do. Good point, Michael. And I've saved the chat. Darren's putting all the resources from the chat into our notes so that we have all these good links that folks are sharing. And I think one first step I can own as the SISAC facilitator is that we will put together a document of resources. I know the technical writing committee is collecting documents of resources and implementation supports as well, so that we have a collective database of what we know, what folks should know about that they may not know about, and how we can continue to build on that as we move through this work. Darren, I'm going to have you go to the next slide. And the same thing goes for this. Like, what would it take to start something? I don't know, you know, some folks are on Facebook, some are not, like, but keeping in mind, could we do some of these things that don't exist, or could we latch on to ones that do? Take us to the next slide, Darren. Okay. So I wanted to leave at least the 7 minutes that remain to talk about these two next steps, because they take us, as we move forward from now towards our next quarterly meeting in September. There are two things that could potentially happen between now and that meeting. That meeting's at the end of September. One is an opportunity. So Alistair Chang, who represents Ward 2 on the state board and who is a member of the Education Standards Committee, which is now where the social studies work sits inside the new state board committee structure. Alistair had conversations with students, specifically Asian American Pacific Islander students, during the instances of hate and hate crimes that had risen up against Asian and Pacific Islander American students. And it launched into a series of conversations that we had at the Education Standards Committee around, should we have a discussion about ethnic studies and students' ability to access learning about their own culture and other cultures? How does this play out in other cities and states? How have they done it? He took that conversation to our student advisory committee on the board And it crystallized in that conversation that students feel like they basically echoed back a lot of things that we put in our guiding standards. They're hearing about things from a Eurocentric perspective. They're hearing history and culture presented in relation to whiteness. And they're not getting to have deep conversations about knowledge of difference that is not white-centered or in opposition to whiteness. So how do we talk about ethnic studies, cultural studies, issues of difference in more expansive ways? And Alistair's been trying to help us think through, could we do some sort of a panel that we bring in outside experts and have chance for dialogue, that we would talk about this issue, about how you equip both students and teachers with this knowledge of difference. And I think this gets a little bit at both what Scott and Sarah raised, which is lots of teachers are going to need new content expertise, new capacity to have these conversations across the grade levels. So Alistair's interested in finding an audience to bring to this panel. And I said, well, if I were suggesting an audience, we've got teachers and professors and museum professionals and all sorts of folks steeped in this work on our technical writing committee and our SISAC. What if we pose this opportunity to them as sort of our core audience? We'd make it a public event, but that the dialogue would be happening between folks here. These were some of the questions that he sort of posited for discussion, and he's got some panelists already sort of on the docket. My one question just in the chat is, if we were to host an event like this, I'm going to assume there's at least some interest. So if I'm wrong on that assumption, please disavow me in the chat. If I am right on this assumption, please drop in the chat the month between now and October when this would be most easy for you to attend, or most of interest for you to attend. And if there are comments or questions, feel free to raise hands again. Lizzie, is that hand up new or same hand? Okay, cool.
Same hand. I should lower it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing. Cool. Okay, so it's looking like, I mean, August might be a time when we seem to capture a lot of folks, maybe not Scott's most favorite time, but that August, September timeframe might be a time we can target. And so far, no one has disavowed me of the notion that there would be at least interest in attending and being part of a dialogue with experts. So I'm proud to be able to say to Alistair, see, I was right. I knew there would be excitement about this from this crew. So I will bring this back to Alistair, and we'll have a chance to more put a little more form around it, try to find a date that we can harness these experts, and then send out an invitation as well as some parameters around like how much time we'll have for discussion and whether we can put questions in ahead of time, so that we can make sure we touch on topics of interest. But thank you for that. Darren, last slide. This is a reminder, which is that the other thing the SISAC has an opportunity to do that is not in our 4 quarterly meetings is late July standards draft review. Now you heard from Sarah and from Melanie and from Michael the immense amount of work they've got before them. So I don't want to put any more pressure on them, but the date we understood that we would have a first draft for review and discussion is the end of July. So let's assume all goes well and that is still the case. SISAC members will be invited to review the draft and provide feedback. And similar to the way we did with the framework for the standards, we'll provide both synchronous opportunity to meet and talk, but also an asynchronous opportunity to provide feedback. And as soon as we have more clarity around the date when we'll get a draft, we'll schedule that feedback session. So what I would ask is that if we have an email for you that you do not intend to check in the month of July, let us know so we know how to get a hold of you in the month of July. And you can just send me or Alex an email letting us know that if the way we've been contacting you during the school year is not a great way in July, just let us know how to ping you. Even if it's, please put it on the state board Twitter and I'll check that. Like if it's a don't call me, I'll call you, that's fine too. But let us know how to get a hold of you so that we can schedule that when we have time for it in July. Any questions with 1 minute remaining. Because that was not like a breakneck pace or anything, but I really enjoyed our discussions. All right, if you go to the last slide, Darren, it's just a reminder that our 2 quarterly meetings remaining that we've calendared for the year are September 21st and the 7th. The 7th we've got on a larger time frame. We have 2 hours for that because we expect that there might be a second draft of the standards or some other conversation to have standards related. So we'll hold that 2 hours for now. You all are fabulous. If you have more questions for the good of the order or more questions for me, stick around. Otherwise, thank you for giving me an hour of your June. To all who are teaching, best of luck making it to the next couple of weeks. And for those of you who are high school teachers, congratulations to all of your graduates. Looking forward to being at a few of the graduation ceremonies in the weeks ahead. Good night, all.
Thanks. Happy summer, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks a million, Jessica. I can't believe you got us out on time. Yay, you.
I do my best, Sarah. Have a good night. Thanks for all your sharing. That was super helpful.
Bye.
Jessica, really quickly, I just wanted to say that